Previously on The Amber Mine.
In this video, I will be slightly changing certain details as well as greatly expanding on the lore of Isla Aventura by taking information from related sources such as the intranet website made for the California ride and 2002's Project By the start of the new millennia, Project had entered its final stages.
In late 1999, InGen scientists, including Dr. Henry Wu, Dr. Victoria Stiles, and Dr. Burton began a campaign to renovate many of their outdated and impure genetic specimens. Following the demotion of Dr. Laura Sorkin in 1985, InGen promoted Dr. Stephen P. Jackson as the chief geneticist and put pressure on him to produce more viable assets. With the assistance of Dr. Henry Wu, who was only an intern at the time, he and Jackson were able to produce species such as the Triceratops horridus, Brachiosaurus bronchi, and Microceratops, now Microceratus, gobiensis. But during the fall of 1986, while Henry Wu was back at school, Jackson was left to finish the roster for Jurassic Park on his own. In reality, Wu served as a better lead for InGen's genetic projects due to his extensive knowledge on genetic replication and compatibility. Due to a lack of his knowledge and the pressure placed upon Jackson during this time, the resulting genetic creations had a higher mortality rate. InGen was severely disappointed in Jackson's failure, and even blamed him for the unattractive appearance of the dinosaurs created during this time, something that was out of his ability to control. The final straw for Jackson came in 1988 with the birth of InGen's prized creation, the Tyrannosaurus rex. The Tyrannosaurs had behavioral issues, constantly fighting each other and always keeping their distance from the scientists monitoring them. InGen blamed Jackson on the T-Rex's antisocial behavior, and now that Henry Wu had finally graduated, InGen demoted Jackson and replaced the spot of chief geneticist with Dr. Henry Wu. As the years went by, more and more genetic abnormalities appeared, but Wu made a point to replace these and other unattractive species with an improved variant. In 1990, Wu proposed a project to improve the methods they used to clone the dinosaurs, such as expanding their sources from mosquitoes to other blood-sucking insects, and filling the gene sequence gaps with animals outside of frogs. Hammond, fearing the project would lead to a delay in the release of Jurassic Park, denied their approval. He did, however, allow for some minor reforms to their methods used for genetic engineering, which led to the creation of dinosaurs such as Dilophosaurus weatherly, and even non-dinosaur reptiles such as the Pteranodon sternbergi and Tylosaurus proriger. In 1995, following the evacuation of Isla Sorna, the population of the dinosaurs had severely depleted, and dozens of species fell back into extinction due to the high competition for resources. By the end of 1996, Isla Sorna reached a point of stabilization at the cost of nearly half of its prehistoric species. When Dr. Henry Wu began his work for the park roster of Isla Aventura, he used this lack of species to his advantage, and convinced John Hammond to allow the geneticists for Jurassic Park free rein over how each species were made. Wu, wanting to further advance his knowledge on genetic power, immediately got to work by cloning the first new prehistoric species for Jurassic Park, a primitive Mongolian ceratopsian dinosaur called Psittacosaurus sinensis. Later in 1997, as part of Wu's genetic revisionist project, he and Dr. Victoria Stiles worked together in revamping the genetic code of their Tyrannosaurus rex in an attempt to breed a more socially active asset. Their experiments succeeded with the unfortunate side effect of creating a far more aggressive Tyrannosaur, which Hammond believed would also make a more exciting attraction. As for the outdated species, however, John Hammond had difficulties in finding a purpose for them. Specifically for the first iteration of Velociraptor antihorpus and the unattractive Brachiosaurus altithorax. There were difficulties determining a paddock location for the Brachiosaurus after it was removed from the river adventure attraction, and due to its unusual appearance, many believed it wouldn't stay in the park. As for the Velociraptors, upon being replaced by a more stable variant in 1992, its population slowly dwindled due to a skin disorder, and Hammond believed it was too costly to keep them alive only for them to die in infancy. In an attempt to find a solution without euthanasia, Hammond opted to try and sell the dinosaurs. The Brachiosaurus to third world countries as a source of exotic meat, and the Velociraptors to Eastern Marxist dictatorships as guard dogs. However, the plan failed as there were no cost-effective ways to transport the Brachiosaurus, and at this point in the early 1990s, most countries didn't believe in Malcolm's crazy rantings on InGen's dinosaur operations, and believed that the call from InGen was an elaborate practical joke. And so, following the promotion of Jim Boucher to Director of Security at InGen, he and other InGen mercenaries defied John Hammond's orders and started a new variant of Operation Clean Sweep. As like the original project in 1994, this operation was intended to wipe out the Brachiosaurus and Velociraptors by using a mix of pesticides and fertilizers carefully snuck into their food and water supply. Initially, it was largely successful on the Brachiosaurus, yet not as such on the Velociraptors since they kept attacking the handlers as they were sneaking the makeshift poison into their paddock. After a while, InGen finally found a use for the Brachiosaurs in the Herbivore Plains attraction and relocated them before they had gone extinct, and the Velociraptors were located to the wildlife reserves in InGen's offshore locations. Boucher's actions were never uncovered by Hammond or the other InGen executives, and wrote that the Brachiosaurs were infected by an unknown toxin in their holding pen, which was promptly abandoned. Meanwhile, Boucher continued releasing dangerous dinosaurs at random as part of his impromptu security drills. In late 1999, following the successful launch of Jurassic Park on Isla Aventura, John Hammond authorized Dr. Henry Wu's passion project titled Project Evolution, with the intention of renovating many of their earlier outdated and impure genetic creations. He began by extracting the blood of living dinosaurs across the facilities in Europe, Japan, and Malaysia, and modifying their genetic code. He removed the donor frog genes implemented back in the 80s and early 90s, and refilled the gaps with more species-oriented genetic donors such as birds and reptiles. He was cautious in his attempts to nullify any potential compatibility errors, and as the project went on, he had developed a specific genetic strain that he believed would nullify compatibility issues universally across all species. This side of Project Evolution led to the creation of improvised variants of Ankylosaurus magnaventris and Corythosaurus casuarius. Dr. Victoria Stiles, the lead geneticist of Isla Aventura, had a more ambitious objective in mind, and used Project Evolution as an excuse to relocate massive amounts of amber from the abandoned facilities on Site B to the hatchery on Isla Aventura, and planned to resurrect the species that InGen left behind in 1995. Using Dr. Wu's recent breakthrough, they began experimenting with the limitations of this potentially limitless technology. Over the years, Wu and other geneticists working for InGen had kept notes on how the change in DNA can affect the animals they cloned at Jurassic Park. And at this point in time, he and Stiles had believed that they could predict the appearance and behaviors of the dinosaurs by implementing specific features into their DNA. Using this idea, they believed that they could construct hyper-realistic dinosaurs based on the modern knowledge of paleontology, leading to the creation of more than 20 new species of dinosaur, including Alamosaurus sainjuensis, Ceratosaurus nasicornis, and Spinosaurus aegypticus. Dr. Udenberg Burton, however, didn't want to bring the past back to life. Using the newest technology developed by Dr. Wu and Dr. Stiles, Dr. Burton intended to improve upon the creation of their prehistoric species by designing perfect hunters. He began to experiment with implementing the aggressive traits of modern hunters into the DNA harvested from Isla Sorna. In October of 1999, Burton had successfully cloned a Pteranodon longiceps. Due to the nature of his experiments, he had little knowledge as to exactly what he was creating, and the resulting assets were born with unpredictable features. They had grown far larger than the Pteranodon sternbergi InGen cloned in the 90s, and the females were nearly twice the size of their initial estimations, and the single surviving male rivaled the size of small as darkids. Perhaps most impressively, they had a toothy beak, which was ironic for pteranodons. Hammond was eager to add them into the Pteranodon Highlands attraction, but many at InGen feared the alpha male would destroy the aviary frame, causing a massive outbreak. Jim Boucher proposed that the male would be relocated to one of the many alternate aviaries InGen owned, but fearing the stability of the reserves, it was decided that they would relocate it to the San Diego complex. Dr. Wu and Dr. Stiles witnessed the full potential of their work with the Pteranodon. While they didn't agree with Burton's intentions, they marveled at the implications their research could achieve. Meanwhile, Dr. Burton continued his experiments, following the creation of the Pteranodon. Following the creation of the Pteranodon, his ambitions grew, and his priority switched from the advancement of prehistoric species to the perfection of life itself. By the start of the new millennia, Project Evolution had entered its final stages. Dr. Burton's work on Project Evolution had taken a dark turn at the start of the 2000s. In secret, he renovated the abandoned Brachiosaurus enclosure and constructed a makeshift laboratory similar to the hatchery on Isla Sorna. He built a large cultivation tube like the ones InGen used to grow animals without the use of an egg so that he could monitor the growth of his creations. Inspired by the work of Dr. Dale A. Russell involving dinosauroids, Burton contemplated on the possibilities of simulating the evolution of dinosaurs post the K-12 extinction event. He theorized that he could manipulate the evolution of an animal while in embryonic development, changing its DNA at key stages to influence its growth in specific ways. To his dismay, the initial tests of his theory were unsuccessful. For an unknown reason, the animals he created failed to incubate properly. He realized at that point that his plans were far too ambitious, and that he needed to start smaller. Instead of evolving a dinosaur into a human, he would need to de-evolve a human into a dinosaur. Unfortunately for Dr. Burton, his work had grown expensive, and there was no chance of him getting further funding from Hammond if he knew the true details of his projects, so instead of raising humans from scratch, he decided to kidnap his contemporary scientists. At first he chose scientists at random to avoid suspicion, but after a while he started kidnapping scientists he had personal problems with. He shot them with tranquilizer darts, the same ones used by security and animal handlers to subdue escaped dinosaurs. He threw their tranquilized bodies into the makeshift cultivators, and remarkably, he found that he was able to change the DNA of his subjects by manipulating the body's natural process of mitosis. He had become a recluse, rarely associating with other scientists, including Dr. Wu and Stiles. While other geneticists were focusing on the future of Jurassic Park, Burton was in his lab creating monsters. As part of his experimentations, Burton had become fascinated with the prospect of a perfect hunter. He turned to aquatic species, animals that had been unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Fish, turtles, cephalopods, and most importantly, snakes. Burton had a special connection to serpents, and he wanted to incorporate them into his creation. He chose venomous species and incorporated the traits of specialized hunters to produce a more viable result in his quest to create a perfect weaponized species. He actually ignored the use of prehistoric DNA, as he believed it was primitive and unrefined. After nearly a year of meticulous work in perfecting his creation, the Greb Nadoo was born. At 12 meters long, it would be an apex predator of the oceans and land. Equipped with a large expanding jaw, a venomous bite, and a powerful body, it would dominate any ecosystem it could reach. Jurassic Park would soon come to realize the destructive potential of genetic power. In October of 2002, Dr. Burton's experiments had begun to destabilize. Ordinarily, the de-evolution process would keep his subjects in a state of stasis, but over the 2 years they've been in their tanks, they had suddenly started waking up. And what's more, their new mutations had not been binding to their bodies that well. They had turned hostile, and despite Burton's continued efforts to keep them at bay, they had grown resilient to the carfentanil used in the tranq darts. On occasion, workers and nosy guests would stumble into the pen, investigating the unusual sounds, only to meet a gruesome end by the Greb Nadoo. For a while, Burton had held on to his experiments, biding his time for the de-evolution process to complete so that he may dispose of them and return to his original plan. But unfortunately for him, fate had other plans. While Dr. Burton was away on other business, Jim Boucher encountered the once-thought abandoned Brachiosaur pen, only to happen upon Burton's experiments. Not understanding the truth of what he had encountered, Boucher decided to release the Greb Nadoo as another one of his impromptu security drills. He rigged an explosive to the gate keeping the Greb Nadoo contained, and triggered the device at a safe distance away. Or so he thought. Once the serpent was free, he watched as it slowly crept out of its pen, believing that it couldn't see him. But in fact, it never lost sight of him. Quickly killing him before exploring the rest of Dr. Burton's compound. Looking for something else to eat, it too happened upon the experiments. Out of curiosity, the Greb Nadoo broke the glass containing the human Dilophosaurus hybrid inside, and out of instinct it spit at the sea serpent, spooking it and causing it to flee into the jungle. The Dino Man, out of rage, released the other experiments and went searching for Dr. Burton. On the other side of the park, chaos reigned, and the Greb Nadoo had entered the river adventure attraction, and being the semi-aquatic animal that it was, decided to stay there. Meanwhile, the human dinosaur mutations had started dismantling park systems and sabotaging the island's power grid, and suddenly all of the dinosaurs had started to escape, but due to the security system failure and the disappearance of Jim Boucher, no one was aware. Guests continued on their way throughout the park while staff started disappearing at the beginning of a now inevitable carnage. On the river adventure, a boat full of guests reached the Hadrosaur Cove, a lush Greenland area filled with multiple species of duck-billed dinosaurs. One of them, a Parasaurolophus, playfully knocked one of the tour boats off the track and into the current leading to the now disabled Raptor containment unit. The Parasaur, amused by its own antics, snorted happily as something new brushed against her in the water. Curious and alarmed, the Parasaurolophus started making its way to the shore, only to be snatched in the jaws of the Greb Nadoo. As for the guests, they had made their way into the emergency maintenance route of the geothermal power plant, where dozens of escaped carnivores, including Compsognathus, Velociraptor, and Dilophosaurus, attacked the refugees. On the Jeep Safari tour, vehicles started being attacked by unknown assailants. Unfortunately, no warning was given to the park command center, since as soon as they were attacked, they lost communication. The helicopter's exhibit was suddenly grounded as the vehicles were torn out of the sky by rogue pteranodons after escaping the aviary with the assistance of a human pterosaur hybrid. In the Triceratops encounter, Dr. Burton was tending to a sick Triceratops when suddenly he was attacked by his Dilophoman creation, who tied a noose around his neck and hung him to the ceiling. And suddenly, people began to realize that Jurassic Park had lost control.
Hey Ember Miners, thanks for watching today's video. Be sure to click the subscribe button on your way out and click the bell icon to be notified of our videos when we upload them.